Christianity was never meant to be popular. This may come as a surprise to many who view Christianity as the dominant religion of the Western world and associate it with power, influence, and cultural prominence. However, a careful examination of the Bible reveals that the Christian faith was never intended to be a mass movement or a popular ideology. In fact, the scriptures repeatedly emphasize that the way of Christ is a narrow and difficult path, one that goes against the grain of human nature and the prevailing values of the world. From the very beginning, the message of the gospel has been a stumbling block to many. Jesus himself warned his disciples that they would face persecution and opposition for their faith. "If the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you," he told them. "If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you." John 15 verses 18 to 20, the Apostle Paul echoed this sentiment, writing that all who desire to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. 2 Timothy 3 verse 12. This is because the Christian message is fundamentally at odds with the values and priorities of the world. The Bible teaches that humanity is fallen, sinful, and in need of redemption. It proclaims the radical idea that we are saved not by our own works or merits, but by the grace of God through faith in Jesus Christ. This message challenges the human tendency towards self-reliance, pride, and a desire for power and control. Furthermore, the Christian life is characterized by self-denial, sacrifice, and a willingness to suffer for the sake of the gospel. Jesus himself said, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." Matthew 16 verse 24. This call to deny oneself and embrace the way of the cross is deeply counterintuitive to the human heart, which naturally seeks comfort, pleasure, and the approval of others. Throughout history, the Church has often found itself at odds with the prevailing cultural and political powers. The early Christians were persecuted by the Roman Empire, which saw their refusal to worship the emperor as a direct challenge to its authority. In the Middle Ages, the Church clashed with the political ambitions of various European monarchs. Even in more recent times, the Church has been a voice of dissent against oppressive regimes and unjust social structures. This is not to say that Christianity has never been popular or influential. Indeed, at various points in history, the Christian faith has enjoyed widespread acceptance and even state sponsorship. But this popularity has often come at a cost, as the Church has had to compromise its prophetic witness and accommodate the values of the surrounding culture. Ultimately, the Church's true power and influence lie not in its numbers or its worldly success, but in its faithfulness to the message of the gospel. The Bible calls the Church to be a light to the nations, a beacon of truth and righteousness in a world that is often shrouded in darkness. This means that the Church must be willing to stand apart from the world, to speak truth to power, and to live out the radical demands of the Christian life, even when it is unpopular or costly to do so. The scriptures make it clear that the way of Christ is not an easy one. Jesus himself said, "Enter by the narrow gate. For the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. But the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few." Matthew 7 verses 13 to 14. This is a sobering reminder that the Christian life is not about seeking the approval of the world or the path of least resistance, but about faithfully following the way of the cross, even when it means going against the grain of popular opinion. One of the clearest examples of this principle is found in the life of the Apostle Paul. Despite his impressive credentials and position of influence within the Jewish religious establishment, Paul encountered fierce opposition and persecution when he embraced the message of the gospel. He was beaten, imprisoned, and ultimately executed for his faith. Yet, even in the face of such adversity, Paul remained steadfast in his commitment to the gospel, writing to the Corinthian church, "For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved it is the power of God." 1 Corinthians 1 verse 18. This is the heart of the Christian message, that the power of God is manifest not in worldly success or popularity, but in the cross of Christ, which represents the ultimate act of self-sacrifice and surrender. It is a message that challenges the prevailing values of the world, calling us to die to ourselves and to live for something greater than our own desires and ambitions. Throughout the centuries, the Church has often been tempted to compromise this message to make it more palatable to the surrounding culture. There have been times when the Church has aligned itself with political powers, sought to accumulate wealth and influence, and embraced the values of the world in an effort to increase its popularity and reach. But in doing so, the Church has often lost its prophetic edge and its ability to truly transform the world. The true power of the Church lies not in its numbers or its worldly success, but in its unwavering commitment to the message of the gospel. This means being willing to stand apart from the crowd, to embrace the way of the cross, and to boldly proclaim the truth of God's love and redemption, even when it is unpopular or costly to do so. This is not to say that the Church should be indifferent to the needs and struggles of the world. On the contrary, the Christian life is one of service, compassion, and a deep concern for the well-being of all people. But this service and compassion must be rooted in the gospel message, which calls us to a radical reorientation of our values and priorities. In a world that is increasingly driven by the pursuit of power, wealth, and personal fulfillment, the message of the gospel stands as a stark and prophetic alternative. It calls us to embrace humility, self-denial, and a willingness to suffer for the sake of others. It challenges us to put the needs of others before our own, to forgive those who wrong us, and to live with a deep sense of gratitude and dependence on the grace of God. This is not an easy path, and it is not one that is likely to win the applause of the world. But it is the path that Jesus himself walked, and it is the path that he has called his followers to walk as well. It is a path that may lead to persecution, suffering, and even death, but it is also a path that leads to true life, to the redemption of the world, and to the ultimate vindication of God's love and justice. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus makes it clear that the way of the cross is not an optional add-on to the Christian life, but the very heart and core of what it means to follow him. He repeatedly warns his disciples that they will face opposition and hardship, and he calls them to a life of radical self-denial and sacrifice. If anyone would come after me, he says, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Matthew 16 verse 24. This call to take up the cross is not just a metaphor or a spiritual exercise, but a literal invitation to embrace the way of suffering and sacrifice that Jesus himself walked. It is a call to be willing to lay down our lives for the sake of the gospel, to be willing to face persecution, rejection, and even death for the sake of our faith. This is a message that is deeply challenging and countercultural, and it is not one that is likely to win the applause of the world. Indeed, throughout history, the Church has often found itself at odds with the prevailing values and power structures of the surrounding culture. From the early Christians who refused to worship the Roman emperor, to the medieval church that clashed with the political ambitions of European monarchs, to the modern church that has spoken out against oppressive regimes and unjust social structures, the message of the gospel has always been a stumbling block to those who seek power, influence, and the approval of the world. And yet, this is precisely the message that the Church is called to proclaim. For the power of the gospel is not found in its ability to win the favor of the world, but in its ability to transform the world through the radical love and grace of God. It is a message that calls us to die to ourselves, to embrace the way of the cross, and to live for something greater than our own desires and ambitions. This is not an easy path, and it is not one that is likely to make us popular or successful in the eyes of the world. But it is the path that Jesus has called us to walk, and it is the path that ultimately leads to the redemption of the world and the vindication of God's love and justice. So, if you are a follower of Christ, do not be discouraged or dismayed by the fact that the way of the cross is not a popular or well-trodden path. Instead, embrace it with courage and conviction, knowing that the power of the gospel lies not in its ability to win the applause of the world, but in its ability to transform the world through the radical love and grace of God. This means being willing to stand apart from the crowd, to speak truth to power, and to live out the demands of the Christian life, even when it is unpopular or costly to do so. It means being willing to face persecution, rejection, and even death for the sake of the gospel, knowing that the true victory lies not in worldly success or popularity, but in the redemption and restoration of all things through the power of the cross.